Welcome back, guys, to Fear Begins. In today's episode, I am sharing one terrifying Appalachia story about a 17-year-old named James and his father David. By the end, you might be think twice before stepping into any Appalachian forest after dark. Before we begin, please consider, and don't forget to like the video and share with your close friend and family. I would also love to hear where you are listening from. Thank you all to support. It is a lot to me. Now let's start. A father and son move to the mountains for a short work contract, and the forest gives them something back that they can never return. This is the story of a boy named James. He was 17 years old, born and raised in the United States. A quiet kid who loved sketching old buildings and taking photographs of rusted places. He lived with his father David in a small apartment on the east side of Columbus, Ohio, their windows facing a strip of railroad and a patch of stubborn weeds that pretended to be a yard. David worked the kind of job that keeps a man's hands rough. He was a site foreman for a land clearing outfit that cut timber and prepared ground for new factory pads. It was not glamorous, but it kept food on the table, and it was honest work the way his father had taught him when a company out of state offered David 2 months of contract pay to oversee clearing along a bend in the Appalachian foothills. He said yes before the ink finished drying. 2 months, and we come home ahead. He told James, "We breathe some real air, and we get right again." They drove in a rust-stained pickup that coughed on the grades, dragging a small trailer with their basics and a second-hand generator. The road narrowed until it felt like an apology, tall black oak and poplar crowding in as if the forest wanted to squeeze the truck into sap. Cell service died before the last gas station, the screen a blank pane of glass reminding them how far they were from voices and help. They followed directions printed from the office computer onto a thin paper that kept folding wrong in David's hands. The company cabin waited on a ridge above a crooked creek that disappeared under laurel thickets and came out again like a shy animal. The place had been a hunting camp once, long ago. 2 rooms and a lean-to, a tin roof patched with tar that shined dull like an old coin. The porch sagged in the middle the way old men do, and a chain hung from a hook where a swing used to be. James stepped out and the air hit him, a green smell, damp and old, like books that had learned to breathe. "Give it a week," David said. "Mountains make you nervous until they learn your name." Local people were kind and careful, the combination you see in places that understand both hospitality and danger. They spoke to David in that measured mountain way, a pace that feels slow until you realize it is precise. At the only diner within 20 miles, a woman with a braid down her back set 2 plates of cornbread and beans and looked at James for a beat too long. "You all up there at the bend?" she said, not asking. "Folks stay away after sundown." David chuckled because men in his line of work have to chuckle at warnings. "It is part of the costume. We will be wrapped by dusk," he said. "Boy needs sleep. I need coffee. Nothing to worry." The woman pressed her thumb into the counter and wiped a clean circle into the laminate like she was making a little moon. "You clear wrong trees, you clear wrong memories," she said, "and memories clear you back." James watched the steam from the coffee make thread lines in the air, and for the first time all day, he felt something lean close that was not a person. Their first week filled itself, the way work always does. David flagged lines through scrub pine and second growth, bright plastic fluttering like trapped birds. He checked maps and soil notes and walked the creek bend where the factory's retention pond would bite into the hill. James helped carry jerry cans and set out stakes. He took photos because that was how he remembered things, the camera clicking tiny heartbeats in his hands. "Stay where you can see me," David said. "Rhododendron can twist a path into knots, and a wrong knot takes a long time to untie." Nights were honest at first, cool and still. crickets sawing the same tune they have always played, the creek. Talking to itself in a whisper older than English. The cabin had no curtains. Just unwashed windows that held the dark the way a mouth holds a secret. On the fourth night, James woke to a sound that did not belong. A slow touch against the clapboard wall, like someone dragging the back of their hand along the grain. Migdi held his breath, because breath makes noise, and noise is a kind of invitation. The dragging paused and started again farther down, then again, circling. As if the cabin were a clock and the hand were sweeping hours made of knuckles. "Dad," he whispered, and David was already sitting up. Because men who spend their lives outdoors sleep like hunting dogs, waking in pieces before the body admits it. They listened, both of them counting without meaning to one slow pass around the cabin, another. Then the quiet that comes after a decision is made. David moved to the door and eased the latch, the old hinges surrendering a soft sigh. "Stay behind me," he said, and the words took up the whole room. They stepped onto the porch, rifles feeling heavier for being held, and the night smelled like pennies the way nights do when something bleeds out of sight. Nothing moved, not the chain on the hook, not the laurel, not the breath of the mountain. Then the chain trembled. Just one link kissing another like a secret passed mouth to mouth. Morning made everything look like a lie. The way morning always tries to cure the night. They found no prints, because the ground was leaf and root and stubborn stone, and because whatever had walked there wanted to leave no memory behind. James saw the first thing then, small enough to doubt, strange enough to remember. On the sill of the back window lay a twist of twigs tied with something thin and dark, not twine, not hair exactly, but it behaved like both. The twigs made a shape that was not a star, and not a man, but felt uncomfortably like a little of each. He held it up by the binding, and it spun like a compass that could not make up its mind. David took it from him and tossed it into the fire. Barrel behind the shed, it burned quick as paper. A thin white smoke that smelled almost sweet. "Kids," he said, "or somebody with nothing better to do. Or the woods," the thought said. But James did not say it with his mouth. The next day the crew arrived. A half-dozen men in mud-stiff boots and laughter shaped like armor. Machines came with them, machines that bite, the kind with names stamped in steel like spells for cutting. They rolled forward and the mountain listened, because mountains hear through roots and rock. They felled a line of skinny pine and a tulip poplar old enough to have opinions, and the air filled with a clean, bright smell like tears. David kept 2 sets of maps, one official and one drawn by hand with the stubborn care of someone who knows. That paper listens better when you speak its language. Near the bend, his pencil stopped, and he frowned in that small way that tells a son his father is worried, but does not want to make a shape out of the worry. A ring of stone sat half buried in leaf mold, not stacked but placed the way people place things when their hands have known the same motion for 100 years. Each stone wore a stain like smoke on the side that faced inward, and the center of the circle was heaped with soil, the color of old bruises. David crouched, ran 2 fingers across the nearest stone, and leaned back on his heels. "Old fire ring," he said, but he did not reach to kick it apart. He marked the circle onto his private map and drew the flag line around it in a dogleg that would cost time and fuel. The younger men did not ask why, they simply worked, because when a foreman draws a circle around a thing and leaves it alone, that is the way of work in places where rivers write the rules. That night the dragging came back, and with it a tapping, soft but arranged. 3 slow taps, a pause, 3 more. The rhythm of a story that knows it will be told whether or not anyone wants to hear it. James lay with his eyes open, in the kind of dark that is more presence than absence, and he felt something like a small hand slide the air above his ankle, stopping just shy of touch. "Do not," he whispered to the empty. "Do not." The tapping moved to the window, and the glass became an ear. He swung his feet to the floor and sat there, sharing a breath with whatever stood beyond the pain. Something like a voice rose under the creak's whisper. Shapeless words shaped by patience rather than lips. It did not call his name, it called his attention, which is older and harder to refuse. They found another thing by morning, and this. One did not burn. A bundle of laurel leaves woven into a tight mat and folded into itself until it made a little knot, stuffed into the mailbox that had not seen a letter in a decade. Inside the knot were 3 pebbles the exact color of a bruise, and a tooth that had belonged to something that could have been a deer and could have been an idea of a deer. David set it on the porch rail and did not touch it again. "Someone is trying to have their joke," he said. But his jaw made a new line that James had not seen on his father's face. The crew laughed about pranksters until 2 of them did not return after lunch, taking the long way around the job site and ending up on the road to town, pale and quieter than men usually are when they make a choice to leave. They said the woods went wrong for a minute. That trail's bent, and the same 2 crows crossed their path again and again, as if time had hiccuped and spit them back. They said it without wanting to make too much of it, because saying a thing births it in front of witnesses, and men like them have no baptism for that kind of child. On the 8th night, fog came up the creek like something on purpose, not a blanket but a visitor. It reached the porch steps and paused as if to be invited. The chain on the hook lifted and laid itself. Down, lifted and laid, a rocking without wind. "Inside," David said, and inside felt like a word with walls and a roof. They barred the door with a 2x4 that fit the brackets like it had been cut for that job by a man who knew he would need it. James leaned on the cool of the window and watched the fog gather a leaning shape, not a body and not a body. It tilted, and the tilt felt familiar, the way a head tilts when a question becomes a hook. "Do not give it your full attention," David said in a voice that came from farther back in him than usual. "Look enough to know where it is, and then look away." "Why?" James asked. The word a made thing breaking the quiet. "Because that is how you feed it," David said. And the chain lifted and laid, agreeing. The next day brought a map buried under the tongue of a fallen log, a map that should not have been there and yet had been waiting. It looked like old deer hide, but it smelled like rain on stone, and the lines inked across it were too exact to be guesses and too crooked to be made by a machine. Circles marked the bend and the ridge above the cabin, and a place downriver, where sycamores made a white bone fence along the bank. In the margin, a hand had written a name that was not quite a name, letters leaning into each other as if they were scared to stand alone. David did not show the crew. He folded the map and slid it into the inner pocket of his jacket like a live coal. He said they would finish the lower cut and leave the creek bend until an engineer came up to walk it with him. The engineer would not come. Men like that do not like to spend nights where the world keeps its old books. James began waking at the same time each night, a minute after 2 by the clock that had belonged to David's father. The hands would click and refuse to move, holding the minute like a hostage, and the cabin would feel suddenly too small for its nails and boards. Sometimes he heard a woman's voice from the tree line, not words but the shape words, making the mouth before they become sound. Sometimes he heard his own voice answer from a place that made the hair lift along his arms. He started leaving his sketches face down because eyes can be windows and windows can be doors. "Do not say yes," the thought said, and he understood without knowing why that yes could be said in 100 ways that did not sound like that. Word one afternoon, he followed David down to the creek with a coil of marking ribbon and a length of chalk line. They found a place where the bank had slumped into a small hollow because the soil had been cut away from under it by water that knew how to work without hurry. Bones lay there, not human. He told himself, because he needed that to be true. Ribs. And something curled like a question mark, and a length of spine with teeth marks he could not place. Stuck into the silt was a stake made of bone, sharpened and blackened at the point, tied to a string that led under the bank into dark. David cut the string with a pocket knife, and the sound it made when it snapped felt more like a sound leaving than a sound being made. The creek went quiet for a long 3 seconds, as if it too had been waiting for that cut. They should have left that day, and David said as much out loud, because saying a truth can sometimes turn it into a plan. He drove them to town to buy a prepaid phone that would catch a bar or two on the highway, and he mailed a key to his sister with a note that said, "Keep this safe." At the diner, the braided woman set down their plates without a word, then laid a small black Bible on the table, the way you set down a clean bandage. "It is not for preaching," she said. "It is for remembering a name when your mouth forgets how to make it." David nodded and put the little book into his jacket beside the map that was not quite leather. On the way back, a buck stood in the road and did not move, not for the horn, not for the lights, and when it lifted its head, one eye was an empty place, like a thumb had pressed through wet clay. They went around it slow and did not speak for the rest of the drive. Words would have made the air too heavy to breathe. The night the thing came up the steps, rain had washed the world into shapes that do not last. Water ran off the roof in ropes, the gutter cough sounding like someone trying not to cry. The chain on the hook went still, and the quiet it left felt like a held breath. The first step was light, as if the boards were testing the idea of weight. The second step knew more, and the third put a thought into the wood that the nails did not like. "Back wall," David said. "Behind the table," and his voice made a room inside the room where fear could not enter. They stood with their backs to the cold of the logs, and watched the door the way men watch a mouth that is thinking about a bite. The latch lifted very gently, so gently that the door did not understand at first, and then it grew frightened and stuck itself. Wood swelling in the rain the way it does under a hand that it does not know. In the window glass a shape leaned. Not a face and not out of face. A dent where a face ought to be. A decision trying on different reasons. "Do not speak to it," David said. "Do not give it any of your names." "Whose names then?" James asked before he could stop himself. "Any you want to keep," David said. And the door shivered like a horse with a fly on its flank. It left at dawn the way nights leave. Grudging and with promises, they slept in the wrong parts of the day and worked in the wrong parts of the light, because fear tells time with its own calendar. The crew did not come back after the storm. 3 men texted David from a hill where a tower sometimes remembered them, saying sorry in a way that meant they had chosen to live. David said they would pack on Sunday. He said it twice as if the saying could move the days faster. Saturday brought a stillness that made sound guilty. Even the creek kept its voice. Under its tongue, James walked the line above the cabin because he needed to measure the quiet or drown in it. He found the ring of stones again, only now there were 2. The second inside the first, the way scars sometimes come in pairs. Between the rings, a lattice of little twig men lay face down like a school of fish, all pointing their stick hands toward the cabin. In the center, a pile of gray ash had been shaped into a shallow bowl, and in the bowl lay 3 pebbles and a tooth, a sister to the tooth they had thrown away with the laurel knot. He did not touch any of it. He did not speak to it. He did not even count, because counting is another kind of naming. And he wanted to keep whatever he had left. When he turned to go, he saw the man, or the idea of a man that had borrowed a man's outline, standing beyond the sycamores where the creek curved. It wore a coat the color of old cardboard, and water ran from the cuffs although rain had stopped. Its head tilted the way you tilt a jar to see what is left inside. "Go back," David said from behind James. And James realized his father had followed him without making any noise at all. "It is watching." James whispered, because whispers leave fewer footprints. It is measuring, David said. And the thing moved one step forward, and all the trees did not move in sympathy. Do not look long, David said. You feed it with your stare. They looked down together the way you look at a grave for someone you did not know, but have been asked to respect. When they looked up, the man was 3 steps closer and somehow had not walked any of them. Back, David said. And they backed until the ridge hid the creek, and hid the thing that had used the creek to explain itself. They packed in a hurry that felt slow, because some minutes carry sandbags in their pockets. James took photos without thinking, and then deleted them without thinking, because some things do not want to live in rectangles. They loaded the truck and left the generator, because it had begun to smell like pennies and regret. The road down from the ridge was a bow pulled tight, one wrong choice away from making a different music. Halfway to the highway, the truck stalled, and the lights went out, and the world around them turned the color of the inside of a mouth. Battery. Cable, David said, grateful for a sentence he knew how to finish. He popped the hood, and the hood did not want to rise, and then did. James held the flashlight, and the beam shook, because hands do that when a quiet has teeth. Something moved in the ditch, dragging itself the way heavy chain drags across concrete. Get in the cab, David said, and the word now sat under the sentence like a cutting edge. James slid into the truck and locked his door, and reached across to lock David's, because sons sometimes do what fathers forget when the air gets thin. The flashlight beam fell and rolled and lay shining up into the hood, making a little moon of cold light. A hand closed around the edge of the fender from underneath. Not a hand, and not a hand. Long and wrong and wet like a rope pulled from a well too fast. Name, David said to himself, and he reached into his jacket and pulled out the little black Bible and opened it with the weariness of a man who has lifted too many things that were heavier than they looked. He read the first verse he landed on, not for piety but for sound, because some sounds are older than the things that hate them. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow, he said, and the words strode out of his mouth and sat there. Feet on the road. The hand slipped free of the fender, and the hood fell, and the engine coughed alive, as if it had been holding its breath with them. They drove without talking, because speech would have made them remember they had tongues, and tongues can be persuaded. The highway's first green sign looked like a promise someone else had made on their behalf. They took the shoulder too fast, and the truck shivered and kept its feet. At the first town with a name they could pronounce without disrespect, they stopped at a church whose windows were full of bright stories. David left the key with the pastor and the map with the knot leather. Smell with him too, because some men will hold a thing for you when you cannot hold it yourself. They rented a room with a bedspread that looked like a map of a country nobody loved, and slept without dreaming, because dreams had been busy all week and needed to rest. You could end a story there and call it good. But endings are lies we tell to rooms that need straight lines. They went home to Columbus. They went back to noise and a refrigerator that hummed until it forgot itself and stopped. David found a different job, because a man cannot live forever on the money he meant to save. James went back to school, and the bell sounded like a small mercy. For a month and then another, the world held, and then it did not. On a Tuesday that had the decency to look ordinary, James woke at 2, and the clock held its breath and did not move. A soft touch traced the clapboard wall under his window. Only his apartment did not have clapboard. His wall was drywall with a dent where a chair had once gotten angry. He sat up, and the air in the room did the thing air does when it remembers a mountain. It grew heavy with green and stone. Something like a chain lifted and laid itself down, quiet as a moth closing its wings. He turned his head and caught the least bit of reflection in the window, a shape leaning toward the glass from the other side of a world. The glass became an ear again, the way a scar becomes a weather prophet. Do not say yes, he told his mouth, and his mouth listened, out of the corner of his eye. He saw a small knot of laurel leaves on the sill, the same. Knot and not the same, folded into itself until it kept a secret for someone else. He did not touch it. He did not name it. He did not count. He reached into the drawer where he kept the tiny black Bible, not for belief but for sound, and his hand closed on it with the exact relief of a man finding a step in the dark. He read aloud, not to be heard, but to fill the room with a shape older than whatever had learned his address. The knot trembled once and was a normal knot again, as if it had changed its mind about coming here. The clock ticked to the next minute and took the room with it. He did not sleep, but morning found him anyway, as morning always does when it wants to make you think you won. David called at noon and did not say why. They talked about small things. Because small things build rafts, and men who have crossed bad water learn to keep rafts ready. Before he hung up, David said the thing he had not said in the mountains, because it had been too late there for those words. "Listen to me," he said. "We do not go outside after dark to see what knocks. We do not answer when something we cannot see calls. You us by our names, we do not look long at what looks long at us. Do you understand?" he asked. And the silence after was the kind that does not need an answer, because both people in it already know. "Good," he said, "good." In the months that followed, life became a careful thing, the way you carry a bowl of water filled to the lip. James learned where to look and where not to. And he learned that sometimes a door is a story, and sometimes a story is a door. He stopped taking photos at windows and began drawing from memory instead, because memory has its own shutters, sometimes. In crowds he felt watched in a way that had nothing to do with people, like a hill back east had misfiled his absence, and kept checking the drawer to make sure, on the worst days. He would smell pennies and creek water in the same breath, and notice sit down until the world unfurled again on the best days. He could stand in a park and hear only the honest sounds. A train, a dog, a kid laughing because the sun had turned. A puddle into a coin. They never went back to the cabin, not to sell it, not to empty it, not to prove a point to a thing that did not care about points. Somewhere up there, the ring of stones had been made into 2 rings, and maybe by now 3. Because memory gets thicker the more it is asked to hold. The chain on the porch hook might lift and lay on fog nights, and the creek might keep 1 minute out of every night just for itself. If a map lies under the tongue of a log, it will turn to leather or not leather, depending on who needs to find it. If a boy named James walks by a window and the glass turns its head to listen, he will open a book and say a sound that is older than either of them, and the sound will go out into a world that knows what to do with it. When he thinks about it now, he tries not to think about it directly. He lets his mind come at it sideways like light through leaves. He does not ask himself if the thing in the woods was a man or a memory, a witch or a wound, because answers have their own gravity, and he has learned how heavy they can be. He tells himself the mountain is an old book, and some pages are pressed flowers, and some are pressed hands. He tells himself his father did right by walking them out before the mountain could make up their minds for them. He tells himself that some circles should be stepped around, not broken, not entered, not measured, only marked and given back to the ground that wore them first. And at night, when the clock sits on a minute like a bird on an egg, he breathes slow and refuses to make any names with his mouth. Do not say yes, he tells himself, and the words do not need to be loud to be true. He places the little black Bible where his hand can find it in the dark, and some nights he does not need it, and some nights the room asks for the shape of its sound. He lives, he learns, he does not go outside to see what knocks. The mountains keep their books, and he keeps his. And between them lies a quiet that feels like an agreement. Some things are not for clearing. David told him once when the sun was low and the pickup smelled like oil and pine. Some things are for walking around. James nodded and looked at his hands. hands that could hold a camera and a Bible and a steering wheel and a door closed. He thought of the chain lifting itself and laying itself down. A little heartbeat for a porch that remembers boots and fog and waiting, he thought. Of the ring of stones that had made itself 2 rings and then 3 to hold something still without touching it. He thought of the creek taking the breath when a string was cut, and how even water can choose to stop speaking for a second. He decided that was what he wanted, that second, that choice, to turn his face away from a glass that wants to be an ear. He decided to live like a man who keeps his names in his pocket with his hands over them. He decided to listen without answering, and to answer only when the voice is made of lungs and warm breath and a person standing in the same weather as him. If you ask him whether the mountains ever sent anything after him, he will say no with a voice that means yes and also means it does not matter. He will tell you he left something there, and something there left its shape in him, and that is how. Exchanges work in places older than maps. He will open his window in spring and let the train air in. He will close it in autumn when the leaves make the city sound like the woods. He will wake some nights at a minute after 2, and he will lie still and let the clock be what it wants. He will keep a small knot of laurel in a jar of salt, because gifts sometimes want to be kept where they cannot do any work. He will think of a woman in a diner wiping a circle clean into laminate, a little moon for a sentence to land in. He will carry on, which is the bravest thing a person can do after a story tries to finish them. And when his father is old and the porch is different and the air is thinner, they will sit sometimes without speaking and feel a chain move in a memory. They will not say the name of the place because names are doors and doors are obligations. They will say instead the small true things that keep a world upright. Pass the salt, hand me the wrench. There is coffee on the stove. They will leave. The rest of the book the mountain keeps, closed and heavy and complete without them. And if a boy not yet born one day walks a ridge road and finds a ring of stones with another ring inside it, he will feel his own mouth want to say yes to something he cannot see. He will hold his breath and count to a number that makes sense only to him. And if he is lucky, some old sound will come to him like a rope in the dark. He will take it, and he will leave, and the mountain will turn a page without making a sound. Do not look long, the lesson says. Do not answer when you do not know who is asking. The lesson says, do not break circles that were drawn before you. The lesson says, carry your names like warm coins and spend them only where people can see the color, the lesson says. And if you have to choose between proof and leaving, choose leaving. This is the story of James and David, and the way a place can notice you back. This is the story of a cabin that learned their names and a chain that kept time with fog. This is the story of a map that was not leather and a Bible that was not a sermon but a sound. This is the story of how you go into a mountain with a job and come out with a promise, and if you are wise, you keep it.